Good morning. My name is Reverend Susannah Currie. This is the second lecture on July 29th, 2024 at the Freiburg New Church Assembly. And in the attempt to go from a Bible story to sequentially another Bible story, I'm going to talk about the Israelites and their transition out of Egypt. And it's a well-known Bible story, but it has a really important parallel for today. So let's imagine ourselves in Old Testament times, and the story that we're going to move into is leaving Egypt, but we need to know how the Israelites got there. They went during a famine to their brother Joseph, who was a high-ranking leader in Egypt, to be fed during the famine, and he accepted them and fed them. And they made their homes in the land, but eventually became slaves to the Egyptians after Joseph's death. And many generations passed, and the Israelites suffered slavery, poverty, and oppression, both as a community, as families, and individually. So what does it mean to be a slave? Well, you have a master, and the master tells you what to do and when to work, provides minimal food, and controls all your life decisions. And this is a natural captivity, as it limits the Israelites externally. But it's also a spiritual captivity, as they are captive to their own understanding, to their beliefs, their prejudices, their habits, their comforts, the knowns of their life. They are steeped in the experience of slavery in Egypt, in this spiritual slavery, where they have no choice. And as we hear in the story, Moses asks Pharaoh to release them. And Egypt, both the Egyptians and the Israelites, suffered with the 10 plagues. And I had to write them down because I thought it's so interesting. Water to blood, frogs, lice, flies, livestock pestilence, boils, hail, locust, darkness, and killing of the firstborn. Now that would demoralize pretty much everybody, wouldn't it? And the Israelites, in their release, when Pharaoh finally releases them, and as we know, sent soldiers to try to kill them before they crossed the Red Sea, the Israelites make it to the wilderness finally. But are they really free? They are naturally free. Their bodies are in the wilderness. But the Israelites, when they make it to the wilderness, they wander for 40 years before reaching Canaan because they were still spiritually slaves. And a quote from Martin Luther King Jr., "Freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed." And Moses was the one who demanded. The people followed Moses. They were released from their natural slavery. So how come they were not free to enter the promised land? Being freed from slavery in Egypt represents the release from this increased knowledge where they went. Egypt represents a place of learning, but this knowledge alone did not help them to become spiritually released from freedom, because they became stagnant when they stopped making choices about their own lives, minds, and hearts. So let's think about this today. Are we in captivity to our own current understanding, to our learned beliefs, our prejudices, our habits, our comforts? Are we steeped in the knowns of our daily lives, like the Israelites were steeped in the slavery of Egypt? And we need to think of this in a number of ways, not just as individuals, but as a society, as a larger community, as families, and as well as individuals. And when I was thinking about what examples would help us to understand that, think about the time when they had to start accepting that the world was not flat. Grumble, grumble, grumble. Resistance to accepting that all people are equal. Grumble, grumble, grumble. Change. How often do we allow change and accept change? How often do we grumble, grumble, grumble? Change is the work of God in humanity and in the world. change of the seasons, change of the way we live, the change of location. It's always going to happen. But are we slaves to our modern understanding, thinking, science, reason, and logic? Do we just love our minds? Don't we just love what we understand? But do we know everything? And do we act thinking that God has nothing to do with it? Does our narrow-mindedness affect more than ourselves, but our communities and our society and our world? We may feel strong in our love for God and believe we are following God's call, but what are we thinking? And from that thinking, how are we acting? Are we grumbling at our situation like the Israelites? Are we steeped in a mindset influenced by and influencing others into negativity? Are we afraid in this negativity, afraid to interact, fearful of change, angry when we lose something we relied on, as the Israelites were angry when they lost the security of knowing, at least if it was not a big meal, they got a meal in Egypt, and in the desert they didn't, not until they complained to Moses. So they grumbled and they grumbled. And they finally were given what they needed to survive. So we need to accept spiritual freedom. We need to accept it within. We need to let go and let God. We can choose to think positively, to interact with others, open ourselves to be changed, accept the reality when we lose relationships or work or places or resources. And let us trust in God that all life's experiences are guiding us out of natural captivity into a spiritual freedom. And we enter then into more deeply trusting the Lord. Viktor Frankl, who I love his work, he has a quote that says, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." So if we believe that all is done by the Lord, what's our part? Good question. From the Arcana, we learned that when it is said, "And Moses said to the people," means instruction through God's truth. Quote, "Remember this day on which you came out of Egypt, out of the house of slaves," unquote, means that especially we should call to mind the state which was ours when we were delivered from spiritual captivity by the Lord. "For by the strength of the hand of Jehovah you were brought out from there," means that they were delivered by the Lord's divine power. So this instruction to call to mind the state from which we were delivered is a way for us to understand that we are experiencing and accepting change. We can grow beyond our physical world reality, our natural understanding, by God, through our life experiences when we become aware of our state of mind. And let's think for a minute. When have you felt freed from something that was holding you back from a new idea of a life of good and truth? "Oh, I can't do that." "Oh, we'll never be able to accomplish that." "Well, we might as well just sit down and go home." I could easily just express how much grumbling is in our society by just saying, how often have people said, "Oh, good, change"? Not too often. Can we become aware of our ego and its grip on the status quo so that we can open ourselves to God's influx and all of the ways in which we are being given in this life to come to a fuller understanding of good and truth? As the Israelites, we often grumble about our state of being, especially during loss and grief and things that we have to let go of. But we have a choice of how to respond. God has given us spiritual freedom. I'd like to just elucidate a little bit about the Israelites and their grumbling. They complained to Moses for all the things they thought were better than freedom. They grumbled in the desert for water. And in Exodus 15, the waters were bitter, and Moses threw his stick in, and they became clean. They grumbled in the desert for water again in Exodus 17, for they were thirsty, and Moses struck the rock, and out of which came clear water. And then they grumbled in the desert for food in Exodus 16, and they were given manna and quail. And manna, as described by Swedenborg, symbolizes the good of charity that arises from the good truth of faith. And it represents a spiritual nourishment that is unknown to individuals before they undergo a process of inner transformation or regeneration. So as we heard, they grumbled for water, and they grumbled for water again, and finally they grumbled for food. They were finally ready to start to receive some spiritual nourishment. Now, in Exodus 16, we hear that the Israelites ate manna for 40 years until they came to a land that was settled. They ate manna until they reached the border of Canaan. And in Numbers 14, it reads, "Your children will be shepherds here for 40 years, suffering for your unfaithfulness, until the last of your bodies lies in the desert. For 40 years, 1 year for each of the 40 days you explored the land, you will suffer for your sins and know what it is like to have me against you." That means he doesn't like grumbling. So some of us won't be entering the promised land. Grumble, grumble, grumble. If we complain about everything, unless we stop seeing everything in a negative light, change as a bad thing, we will not achieve spiritual freedom. Explanation of the 40 years comes again in Numbers 32. "Surely none of the men who came up out of Egypt from 20 years old and upward shall see the promised land which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, because they have not wholly followed me, except Caleb and Joshua, because they have followed Yahweh completely. Yahweh's anger was kindled against Israel, and he made them wander back and forth in the wilderness 40 years, until all the generation who had done evil in the sight of Yahweh was consumed." And from the Arcana, "With the person who is a spiritual church," meaning you have spiritual freedom and a spiritual understanding, "life from the internal exists within the church's factual knowledge, for the factual knowledge residing with him has been made subordinate and brought into a state of order, which is such that it may receive an influx of goodness and truth." So there's not much hope for the old folks on the wilderness journey. They are not able to change their negative thinking. They are focused on, we had a good life as slaves, we ate once a day, and we worked hard, but we didn't have to wander around in this desert not knowing what to do. Can they call to mind the state which was theirs when they were delivered by the Lord? Yes, they know what it was like there. Are they accepting the changes of the wilderness journey? No. Grumble, grumble, grumble. Here's what we have to do as well to call to mind that state which is ours when we are delivered from spiritual captivity by the Lord. And this is from true Christian religion. The divine design is that we arrange ourselves for receiving God and prepare ourselves as a vessel and a dwelling place where God can enter and live as if we were his own temple. We have to do this preparation by ourselves, yet we have to acknowledge that the preparation comes from God. This acknowledgement is needed because we do not feel the presence or the actions of God, even though God is in fact intimately present and brings about every good love and every true belief that we have. This is the divine design that we follow and have to follow to go from being earthly to being spiritual. Let's pause on that for a moment. We have to do the work and acknowledge it is God doing the work through us. It seems like a paradox. I found whenever something seems like a paradox, it's divinely true. We have to acknowledge that God is doing this work in us, wants to bring us into spiritual freedom, But yet we have this natural tendency, especially we reinforce it in community. If one person is negative, how long does it take for the whole group to go negative? Not very long. If one person is extremely positive, that also affects the community around them. So we are not just doing this spiritual growth journey for ourselves. We are doing it in community, as we are now. We are all together. We all want to learn more about what the Lord has in mind for us. I'm retired now. I'm especially waiting to hear what the Lord has in mind for me. So let's do this. Let's be a spiritual church within us, among us, in society, by recognizing the ways in which we are changing and accepting change from the Lord in us. I'm reminded of a time when Sage's oldest Theo came to my house and we had moved the furniture around. He said, "No different, no different." He didn't like things changed. None of us do. We're just, if we're happy today, well, that could go really badly if we change tomorrow. So this promise that was given of the promised land, it reads in the Arcana, it says, "The promise that is made refers to those who are meant spiritually by children of Israel. That is, those who are members of the spiritual church, both those who lived in it at that time and those who are about to come in it." I like to think we're about to come in it. We're headed in that direction. And I want to refer to my little diagram for yesterday's worship that we need to make ourselves fed, clothed, have a place to sleep. And that's caring for the self. And then, as Ken mentioned in his lecture, caring for the world in a nurturing way, as opposed to a what is in it for me way, that is a higher level of, and that's between the natural and the spiritual, but we really need to combine with others in communities to get to a higher level of relationship with God. We cannot do it alone. We need each other. We need each other to share our spiritual journeys with, which is one of the delights of being here, because you can sit on the porch and talk to someone and really hear them. It's said that one of the greatest gifts we can give another is helping them having the feeling of being heard. If we're feeling that nobody's ever had it as bad as I have, if we talk to someone else, we will definitely know we are just another one of God's children. But God loves all his children, all of us individually, and when we form together in community to reach for this higher level of understanding, to move up to where we love others and we love God, and we love as closely as we can to how God loves us, which is without exception, with complete forgiveness and acceptance. We could even change and still love ourselves. The ways in which we're called to change are unique to each of us. God hasn't set out this plan that says you must do A, B, C, and D, and then you'll reach spiritual maturity and spiritual freedom. Your situation will call for a completely unique response from God. But we are the ones who need to recognize that God is doing this in us. I think it's one of the hardest understandings because we experience agency in the world. We do things that we think are going to be a good idea. And how often does that actually totally come to fruition the way you thought it would? Not very often, because God is involved in the entire process with us, as he was with the Israelites. And sometimes we have to make hard decisions. God's saying, nope, nobody over 40 is going to make it to the promised land. It just don't have the open-heartedness and the open-mindedness to accept the change that will occur when they have spiritual freedom. They're more comfortable in captivity, and I'm sure in our many ways, we might not want to use the captivity word. I'm thinking maybe status quo is more appropriate. You know, how many times, well, I don't want to change my job. I'm not happy here, but it's all I know. I don't want to move. I'll lose all my friends, and I don't know if I'll be accepted in the new community. But as I'm sure many of you know, when you've made these kind of big changes, did you maybe find a friend? Did you maybe feel comfortable in the new part of your life that you've explored? I don't want us to have to go through 10 plagues to get free. I would like to say, if you do what Swedenborg reminds us of examining our state of mind, and he doesn't say you have to do it every day, all day, that's a little intense, but examine the state of mind from which you know you can be more free. What's holding you back? What are the chains? What are the obstacles in your way to being able to be a freer person in the world? And it's my belief that we all have more in us than we even know. When I first joined the Swedenborgian Church in Portland, I had no idea that I would be in any way involved in leadership. And one of the first times I spoke, when Reverend Ken was away, it was usually when I would be up to speak, but he was coaching me one day, and I just said, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can get up in front of people and talk. And he looked at me and he just said, well, nobody else wants to do it. I'm like, oh. He says, yeah, they're really grateful that you're doing this because nobody else wants to do it. So that gave me the confidence, not as being anything special, but the one who was willing to step up. And another day, another person will step up. And every time we step up to do something that's harder or something we didn't think we could do, we find new things in ourselves. We find how God is working to bring us out of ourselves into community, which is where we will learn the most, where we will grow the most. Winter is long in Maine and in Rhode Island. It's a really good time in the winter to reflect on where your mind has been. For me, it was by the time spring started to come, I was like, oh, I can't wait to get out into the world, get out into nature, get out and enjoy the new growth. And I wonder what will grow new in me. I don't have anything else written down to say. That was the meaty part. But I just wanted to raise up with this story of the Israelites how we need to take a positive view if we want to grow. The negative view, the grumble, just puts you into this category of too old to change. Is that any place we want to be? No, but we can be. We have that choice. We have the choice to stop God's work in us and say, I got nothing new to learn. But what we're learning is how to be in the world. Spiritual freedom will lift us up so that we can love others and love God. And it's God's work in us doing it. So we have that paradox. Oh, I'm doing something. Whoa, look what the Lord's doing in my life. It's not about us. That's one of the big, I was reading a thing about aging the other day, and that was one of the rules, and it was actually a whole page all by itself. It's not about you. It's just not. It's about us. It's about all human beings. It's about nature and human beings. It's about God in the heavens. It's about all of the angels that have passed on and come by to visit us at different times. All of the ways in which we are living in this world are for the purpose of creating a heavenly community. That purpose of, be the one that dies with the most toys wins, that's not true. That this idea that succeeding on the world level somehow makes you happier, it's not true. Because when you want things, you only want more things. There's no wanting, oh, I've got so many things, I now want to go to church. I don't think that's happening with anybody. So we have to think about what is the value of things. The things, as we talked about, the nature, the beings in the natural world are here and help us to grow when we have new understanding. And I think that for me, this entering the promised land means entering a time when we simply know the Lord is doing all the work. And we are accepting the change. We're not trying to convince anybody else the world is flat. We're accepting the change, seeing where that brings us next. because every change brings further change. And if it's positive change and it's accepting the Lord's movement within us, it's change that will bring us greater spiritual freedom. And if we are focused on the world and ourselves, the what's in it for me crowd, we're not going to grow. We might have lots of things in the world. We might have domination over a lot of people, but that does not bring peace and happiness and a state of mind that is blessed by knowing that the Lord does the work. We simply inhabit the body. And that's all I have to say at the moment. I'd love to hear what you have to say.
I'll run, just like all the time. This is Dean. You mentioned earlier about Viktor Frankl, and that between the, what was it?
Between stimulus and response, there is a
stimulus
space.
and response. So when I have a stimulus, how I react to it is really important, right?
Reacting is the first thing you do.
Well, that's what I mean.
Responding is after you react.
Susannah, that's what I mean is we're all reacting. We're not really sharing. Come on, man. I mean,
We're often not taking the time to consider a response,
that's
correct?
right. And I'm just saying I'm guilty of it all the time, as you know. But it does mean that we have to do some work within our heads. But people are reacting a lot more than they're thinking about peace and love, man.
It took me a long time to understand this concept of let go, let God. I remember being younger and seeing that on a bumper sticker and just sort of thinking, oh, it's a silly saying or something. I don't know, it just didn't resonate with me. But going through losses, changes, and feeling anxious about, I got to be in control here. This can't happen. I got to make sure it's all okay. You realize that you have much less anxiety when you can just say, let go, let God. And so it took some time for me to learn that. But I think, I'm not sure what I'm trying to say. I think it's sometimes you just sort of think of it as sort of a trite saying, but it really can relieve anxiety and let you really experience your life instead of worrying about what's going to happen and how I'm going to fix it all, because you can't, whether it was losing my husband to cancer or changing a job, which turned out to be a great thing. Sometimes the great things comes after, sometimes you just learn something from change, but realizing that God is in charge of it all just allows you some freedom. So I agree with that.
And we naturally do want to know what's going to happen. And I, when you were speaking, I had to, a quote from my 3-year-old granddaughter, Charlotte. Whenever she's in this situation, she goes, "What's going to happen? What's going to happen?" She wants to know what's next. That's a very human response, because we don't know whether it will be good or not.
This is Sage. Well, connecting those last two comments, that space between stimulus and response feels like to me that one of our primary jobs is to give attention to that space, make more room for it, be willing to be in it, and that the practice of letting go and letting God is inviting God into that space. And I would suggest that when we are just reacting, we are in spiritual slavery. And the truth is most of us are in spiritual slavery most of the time. We're acting out old scripts without any freedom or choice. Right. And the more freedom I get, the more awareness I have of my unfreedom and how prevalent it is. Right. It's really kind of frightening in a way how unfree most of us are. And at the same time, we know what it means to become free, and it has to do with that openness and not knowing and being willing to be still and not move immediately.
And as you mentioned about paying attention to that pause, that space, you know, how do we want to respond? From our selfish needs, from what do we think the world needs, or what other people need? You know, we could respond in a way that includes only us or includes the world and others around us. That's our choice. There's a hand in the back window.
I just was setting some pies out to cool, and I was hearing what you were saying. No. I'm a Montessori teacher. I work with young children, and the word that comes to mind there is practice, because it's the teachers are practicing and the children are practicing. And one little trick that I learned from my training was PB, peanut butter, pause and breathe. And if you can do that before you answer a child, it lets you be centered in what you really want to say. And then often we're asking them when they are reacting because they don't have a lot of words yet, we're saying, what do you want to say? You know, they might want something and scream or hit, and you say, what is it you want to say to that person? Can I help you? Can I give you some words? And so this reminds me, though, that we are still working on those same things. As adults, we're just a little more good at masking it. So it's a practice. We get to practice on earth. Isn't that good?
Practice, practice, practice.
Oh, and one more thing, if I may.
Absolutely.
I'm a talker in the way I think. What Jesse said of let go and let God, today I'll be talking about good soil with the children, and there's, in that passage in the lesson, in the parable of the sower, there's a portion that says, in the Dole Notes about it, that we don't have to, when we plant plants, we don't have to sit with them all the time. We don't have to watch them in the middle of the night. We don't have to like pick them out of the soil and see how they're coming along. God does the rest for us. We do what the best we can, but God is doing a lot.
Thank you. We have a hand over here, and then Amy also. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Oh, Dean, okay, I didn't see Dean's hand. Run, David, run. I just want to say that I know it came off kind of negative earlier, but in our own relationship, change is really hard to change. And the latest thing that we've developed is we want to be the sky, not the weather.
He's going to be the sky, not the weather.
God, you're going to be the sky, not the weather.
Okay. Thank you, Susannah. I'm Gard Perry. So on this issue of pausing, I'm all for it. I, like others, have apparently infinite difficulty with that. It's so automatic. But I've run into a second problem, which appears to be even more profound, and at least in my experience. I wonder, I'll address it to you, Susannah, first, but I'd like to open this question up. It's the matter of interpreting I'll say other people. I have enough trouble interpreting my own behavior, but I'm just going to say this is a matter that I'm bringing up, of interpreting the conduct of another. And so this is wax eloquent for the moment. A famous philosopher said, this is the problem of meaning. The universal human problem is, what does that mean? What does it mean if a person is approaching me and all of a sudden they just turn and walk the other way? Did they forget something? Or did they not want to encounter me? We don't know necessarily.
But we do project.
But we will project, exactly. So this is the issue I'm just raising, is meaning that being that there's one part of the question you've raised is how not to react. The second part that I'm raising is react to what? What was the behavior to which we're now responding? Is it what I thought it was? And in my life, it's often not. I missed it.
And sometimes we have to ask.
And so, yes, actually, that's a great solution to this problem. Is that what, did you mean this or not? So I just wanted to wonder if
Well,
how universal that
the quote
question of
says
meaning
between
might be.
stimulus and response. It doesn't specify, but the stimulus can be a person walking towards you and turning around, as you mentioned. That's a stimulus, and you have to choose your response to that. When we are really confused, what I just want to say, I think it's hard for us to ask someone when we are confused and are kind of projecting negativity onto the situation. If we're not projecting negativity, we can go up and just say, hey, I saw you the other day and you turned around. You know, what was your schedule like? Were you busy? Were you needing to leave? If they really didn't want to see you, they won't tell you, but they'll make something up. The people don't want to hurt each other's feelings. So I'm saying that it's your response you're responsible for. You're not responsible for anybody else's response. And the stimuli can be internal. We have an internal stimulus that we have to think about and respond to. Evan?
This is Evan. That's so interesting, and it occurred to me as you're talking about this, how the rules have changed for the worse online, how people relate to each other. They suddenly have permission, instead of turning around or if they don't want to see someone, to do something like tell them why they don't want to see them in the worst way and get it off their chest, because it sort of feels anonymous. That's the urge. And in-person relationships, and the other person who wasn't sure why the person turned away would say, why would you walk away like that on me? You should have been, just like we don't have the courage to do in a personal exchange. So I'm just curious what you might think about these two ways that are being developed. People react much more viscerally online than they ever would in a personal interchange, and how they protect themselves is totally different now.
Right, right. We have normalized bad behavior in this society.
Right.
It is not looked down on as it used to be. Whether you're in person or online, I think that the space between the stimulus and the response is pretty fast. It's more a reaction than a response, a considered response. Everything has speeded up. Have you noticed that? Just to slow down enough to think, well, what do I want to say to this person? There's not thinking going on as much as reacting and defensiveness and offensiveness. And maybe that's one of the things that needs to be, oops. Nice catch. Just as Kent was saying, that it's time for us to really appreciate the livingness of the natural world. We have to appreciate how unskillful we are unless we let God work through us. There's not much of what people say on the internet that I feel like is God flowing through them. But we need to pause to do that, because as human beings, we always naturally react. That's how we survive in the world. You see a car coming at you, you jump out of the road. But realizing in interpersonal relationships that pause and that considered response it's a sign of maturity. It's a sign of spiritual maturity. It's a sign of recognizing that others have experiences too, and they might come from a different place than we do, and recognizing that everyone's journey is valid. Everyone needs to have their own journey, and that's why I want to stress the uniqueness of God working through you. It's not like how God was working through your neighbor. It's not like how God is working through your children. It's how God is working in you, because God knows you intimately and knows exactly what you need. And sometimes we don't like what we need.
I'm just going to continue this one thought again with Evan's help there. This issue of reaction, because it's so helpful, it's very important. I think you're recognizing with us that we all do it all the time, and that it would be a discipline and a practice. We teach little kids try to do it, so we're learning how to do this. And so I want to just present a framework within which I do operate. It's going to be natural to react. So there is a way of slowing that down, and that can be practices. And we've mentioned that. What I'd also mention, I believe this is the case. It is also natural to interpret the meaning of another person's conduct. If they say hi, they're saying hi. Hi. Say hi back. So, I mean, these are normal things to do. We get in trouble all the time for various reasons, but what I'd like to normalize, at least in my own life, it's okay to interpret. You take a guess. This is what I think that means. This would be similar to not overreacting. So we slow down the reaction. That would be the first step. The second step is not to be totally convinced that you're right. You may not be.
Yes.
So it's a provisional interpretation. And it softens things a little bit and gives us I'll say for myself, it gives me the freedom to, quote unquote, kind of know what's going on in normal human interactions. Seems like that's what they're saying. I'll try something back. But to be careful and cautious and respectful of that dialogical kind of process.
And then you are the stimulus, and you can watch for the response from the other person.
Thank you.
Yeah. Martha had her hand up.
I have to stop and think what I'm going to say. And this is Martha. I was thinking many times when we're trying to interpret the other person, what we're really doing is thinking what our reactions are. If you see someone coming toward you and then they turn around, is that what you do? Is that what you do when you see someone you don't want to talk to? So that's what you're thinking that person is doing. And so I think sometimes it's hard to, you have to understand, and so you do, in a way, interpret if someone's saying hi to you, how you're to respond to them. But I think you can get into trouble by trying to interpret too much. I think that sometimes you're thinking in your own head what your response to things are and not what theirs is. I know people will think I'm thinking something completely different when I say something, and that's not my thought at all. But that may be what, if they said the same thing, that's what their thought would be.
Right.
And so I think it's dangerous to try to interpret too much, because we all do, like you said. Our journeys are all different, our thoughts are different, and our ideas are different.
Yes. In the back to Jen? And I just want to say, I think that we often, as you said, we project onto others the way we would feel, but we also, we're in a state where we think what we have to say and offer is very important. If we could get a reality check from other people, so another way, instead of asking the person, gee, what do you think they meant by that? We need a reality check, because we are only seeing things through our eyes and our own experience. And if we want to have even a better guess at what someone means, we should talk to other people. Jen?
Hi, this is Jen. Something that I find very dangerous and difficult is when a stimulus comes to you from another person and its result is that it's hurtful to you, that, I'm saying you, I mean me, that we often interpret, because I feel hurt, this person's intent, this person is trying to hurt me.
Right.
But in reality, I don't think there's any human being that walks around thinking, I want to hurt that other person.
Right.
It's never that they want to hurt us. But it's our struggle that we all see from the lens of, if I'm hurt, that means somebody meant to hurt me.
If we're hurt, it was important for us to hear what they said so that we could feel that. It's important to know what your feelings are. And when you feel that, perhaps consult the other people and then confront the person. Say, you know, when you said that, this is how I felt. Because, like you said, people don't know. We are very unskillful sometimes in our interpersonal relationships, and we hurt indiscriminately. But also remember that what a person says more about them than it does about you. So even if it hurts, gee, what's going on in their head that came out of their mouth? We could have a little curiosity about that. Sage, did you have something?
This is Sage. Well, just responding to Gard, I mean, I think I often misinterpret, and I think I really appreciate Martha. I think we need to interpret less. And I'm very conscious with my husband how, because we have a loving relationship, I can check out those interpretations and say, oh, wow, I'm feeling this. Is that what you meant to say? And just how much intimacy is required. I wonder if we could practice that here. You know, what other communities? I haven't really found huge amounts of community where I can do that with, other than my partner. But I want to do it more. I want to be in more community where I feel that safety to check out, was that what you were meaning when you said that thing? Because it's so, it can just diffuse a hurt feeling immediately when you can check that out with people. Yes. And I think that would be a high ideal for community, to be in a place where you can honor your feelings, name them, check things out. And maybe they did mean to hurt, you know, maybe they are hurting too. You know, I realize that there's reasons why we don't do it. It's scary. And you could end up, you know, wading into even deeper hurt. And it feels like it's kind of why we're here on this planet, is to communicate better.
Yes, well, I'll say something. You've touched on it, a few different people touched on it, that yes, some people do go around hurting other people, but it's because they're in pain usually. And it reminded me of a story, I think George Stoll told it happened to someone he knew, supposedly. I don't know if I have the exact details right, but someone entered a bus with a gun to commit a robbery, and a very wise man said to him in the proper tone of voice, "Someone must have hurt you very much." And it disarmed the person. And so, but sometimes we have to realize, wow, as someone else said, maybe they hurt me because they're in pain, and it wasn't me personally, but and it did hurt, and they need to stop doing that. But you can respect that. Okay, how can I remove their pain or keep them from hurting someone else until they're healed, or.
Right, and just to use that phrase from the Swedenborg, to examine the state of mind that we're in. You know, if you're a hurt person, you are in a state of mind where you could act very negatively in the world. If you are in a state of mind where you're changing, you might be very confused. You need more people to talk to. There are a lot of ways in which the self-examination of the mind, not trying to examine somebody else, but to invite them to examine themselves with you. That kind of conversation, I think, is what Sage is talking about, that we can be honest with one another. And we have a whole week to do that, so let's get on with it.
Give the number that that's from TCR?
105. Okay, Trevor's got time. Do you have a very last quick word, Colgate?
I'll make believe I'm here. I think a lot of times when you are in a situation and something is said, you basically shut down.
Mm-hmm.
It's the shutdown that's the problem, because you don't listen to the last three words. You pick out something that sets a tone and you shut down. So it may be peanut butter, I don't know what it is, but how do you continue to listen or continue to be in the moment? Because it's probably not bad. It actually might be good, but there's a tendency, and especially with the diverse use of words and language today, to have a word that shuts you down. So it's about God's patience, right? But how do you kind of listen to the whole deal?
Or maybe
or let the whole thing play out so that there's a chance for you to actually
yeah.
think about it. So
Or
it's
be honest in the moment. Say, I have a lot of feelings right now. I can't hear what you're saying.
Yeah. So I mean, it's just in teaching, you can just see when a student gets a comment that looks like it's negative to them, they don't hear anything for the next 10 or 15 minutes.
Yeah.
But that wasn't a negative comment, right?
Right.
So it seems to me that's part of it. How do you stay open and receptive?
Thank you. We'll be adjourning and then be back at 11 for discussion group, if that so interests you.
Where does this go?